no one's talking about the fact that Trump was mentored by Roy Cohn, who is like the grandfather of the modern blackmail economy. Roy Cohn was very involved in J. Edgar Hoover and the original FBI and mob mafia blackmail situations back in like the 40s, 50s. Trump bought the Plaza Hotel, and he overpaid for it and overextended his own financial position at the time in order to get it. And so if you follow that thread from like J. Edgar Hoover and his blackmail situation back at the Plaza Hotel, Roy Cohn being a very big part of that. Roy Cohn was at those parties. He may have been in some ways like, the intermediary or mastermind. I don't know. But then Roy Cohn mentors Trump, and then Trump later buys the hotel that was like the foundation of the original video blackmail scheme. And then Trump, is very friendly and cozy with a lot of the blackmail networks, people like Epstein back in the day before they're falling out, allegedly. And Trump seems to be like, if you look at Trump's image and personality today, it kind of like it matches up well with someone that understands the blackmail game from an early age and became unblackmailable in a certain way, as in like he doesn't drink and he doesn't do drugs. He doesn't really party.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?
I am joined today by the TikTok sensation himself, the X, Quasar. What's up, man? Ian Carroll in the building. How you doing, man?
Dude, so good. Good to talk to you, man. Just got home. Glad to be back in the studio.
Heck yeah, dude. That's probably been the weirdest thing about the evolution of my, commentating life is that I've never traveled more in my life. I've traveled like at least once a month, every month for the past 4 years, and it's absolutely destroying my body. I've been sick for like 10 days. So
yeah, man, I know that story for sure now.
Anyways, I may be misreading this, but it seems to me that you view RFK Jr. pretty favorably. Is that a misread or no?
It wasn't a misread. My opinion of everyone is always evolving, and I got a lot more information about RFK that I'm digging into right now that's changing my view of him. But it's hard to come across with nuance on the internet always.
Sure.
And I think that regardless of people's take on voting for RFK, I think that a lot of his talking points are critical discussions to have in the public space. Yeah. And so in a lot of ways, I just see myself as wanting to use his platform to force those talking points into the political discussion that no one else wants, like none of the other politicians want to talk about most of his points.
Totally agree. I mean, this is why a lot of people will accuse me of planning to vote for RFK Jr. And it's like, dude, I mean, maybe I will. I have no idea, but that's not what I'm doing here. I'm just very appreciative of anyone that broadens the Overton window. For that reason, I've given some favorable coverage to Donald Trump too, because he talks about ending the war in Ukraine, and I think that's vitally important. So anytime a politician, like I don't trust any of these people, they're all super dangerous, but like anytime they're talking about something I support, I'm gonna applaud it in hopes that we get more of it. And I think that's kind of a healthier way of viewing politicians as tools that you compliment when they do the job right and you criticize when they don't.
Absolutely. I think that too many people turn politics into this religious thing where it's like, this is my guy and I won't question him and everything else is evil. And they treat it as like their identity when realistically, like I think of it the way I think of ideas. It's like they are external to us and we discuss them external to us. We weigh the pros and cons, and you are not tied to your politician or to your ideas. And those, you can change your ideas and your politicians, depending on what they do.
Yeah. The only politician that I hold in more than just a tool regard is Dr. Ron Paul, who I just had on the show.
I knew you were about to say that, and I was like, "Yep, nailed it."
But it's only because he's got 40 years of track record in politics where he was just consistently Dr. No, and it's like, all right, well, I know who this guy is. The rest of these people, I have no clue. But just out of curiosity, in your additional research into RFK Jr., I'm sure it drew some red flags when you realized he's got a former CIA agent that's in his campaign. What other findings have you made?
That one is a little concerning, and I haven't done enough digging into it yet to know because it's important to remember that not everyone is evil. And, if you had a good ex-CIA agent on your team, that would be awesome. And that'd be very, in line with RFK's apparent platform.
And it would be nice to keep him alive too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Which is a real concern right now. But the stuff that came up for me that is currently getting a little more research is the blackmail angle, and the sexual diaries, the suicide of his ex-wife, and sort of overlaying that over his current stance on Israel and why he is how he is. Because I think that for me personally, the biggest question for RFK Jr. is he blackmailed in some form? Because we know that Israel is very, very fond of blackmail, especially sexual blackmail. And we know that anyone that is sexually blackmailed by Israel or the Epstein networks or whoever it is, they can't exactly be trusted to follow through on what they say they're going to do if those things go counter to Israel's interests.
Yeah.
And RFK's past is such that it leaves him open to a lot of blackmailable events, shall we say. And I got more information about that past and about what might have gone down that I need to dig deeper into to corroborate, because at the moment some of it is hearsay, and it might never be able to be corroborated beyond hearsay, but you got to dig.
Yeah, I mean, let's just be honest. If you are being blackmailed, you cannot be trusted on anything, because that means that you are basically a functionary of an outside influence, and unless we know who that is and what it's about and what they're demanding of you, I can't trust anything you have to say or how you might actually govern once in a position of power. So that gives me great pause.
I agree completely. And this is where I get really interested in Trump's side of this story. And I think not enough people address Trump with enough nuance. It's either the Dems or he's a pedophile that rapes kids. Look at this AI generated photo of him with a 13-year-old. Or it's the Republicans that are like, Trump wants to kill all pedophiles. He's a hero. He's an angel. Right. And no one's talking about the fact that Trump was mentored by Roy Cohn, who is the grandfather of the modern blackmail economy. Roy Cohn was very involved in J. Edgar Hoover and the original FBI and mob mafia blackmail situations back in the 40s, 50s. Roy Cohn is the ultimate snake double dealer. And Trump was mentored by him. Trump later bought the Plaza Hotel, which is the hotel where the Blue Suite was, where J. Edgar Hoover was hosting blackmail parties with the mob and the mafia once he was already blackmailed.
Trump bought that hotel?
Trump bought the Plaza Hotel, and he overpaid for it and overextended his own financial position at the time in order to get it. And so if you follow that thread from J. Edgar Hoover and his blackmail situation back at the Plaza Hotel, Roy Cohn being a very big part of that. Roy Cohn was at those parties. He may have been in some ways the intermediary or mastermind. I don't know. Yeah. But then Roy Cohn mentors Trump, and then Trump later buys the hotel that was the foundation of the original video blackmail scheme. And then Trump, is very friendly and cozy with a lot of the blackmail networks, people like Epstein back in the day before they're falling out, allegedly.
Yeah.
And Trump seems to be if you look at Trump's image and personality today, it kind of it matches up well with someone that understands the blackmail game from an early age and became unblackmailable in a certain way, as in he doesn't drink and he doesn't do drugs. He doesn't really party. He's made some weird comments about young women, especially his daughter, which is but if you look at his wives, his sort of romantic type, overtly, it actually seems to be sort of mature older women. Full-bodied women. It's not he's into weird, slender, slim, young, super young looking girls, and he's not Leonardo DiCaprioing from a new girl to the next all the time.
Right.
So I see evidence, bits and pieces that lead me to believe that maybe Trump actually was one of the blackmailers at a certain point. That could explain how he got so much power. That could explain how he was able to rise in this world of control and blackmail to upset the presidential election in 2016. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it's those are the kinds of questions I don't see people talking about enough.
No. I mean, that is super interesting, particularly just given his background being a New York real estate magnate. You have to imagine there's going to be some shady stuff in that background alone. But then you throw in the fact that he was associated with Roy Cohn, and it's all right, yeah. Well, now we really have to ask questions. I've actually become pretty good friends with Roger Stone over the past year, because we've had him on our show so many times, and I know he's good friends with Roy Cohn too, or at least he used to be. Do you know if Roger had any play in that world?
I don't know anything about Roger. I've barely dug into him at all. And I mean, a lot of what we know about those times is speculative beyond like the major players. So it's kind of hard to say. I think that a lot of people probably pass through those circles. And as we've seen with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, it's like, it's hard to tell what going on the plane is versus procuring the girls is. It's hard to tell what attending a party of Diddy's is versus like, using the services of Diddy.
yes, exactly. Well, you broke that story wide open, and we haven't heard much about it since. Do you know if that's evolved into real prosecutions against him? Because it seemed like that story it was like huge, and then it just gone.
For sure. We don't know much. What we do know is kind of comes from the fact that the lawsuits, that both the Cassie and then the Lil Rod lawsuits, those were civil suits. Mm-hmm. And then the raid that happened on Diddy's compound was evidence of something very different than a civil suit. So civil suits
you can only raid if it's criminal, right?
Exactly, in the process of a criminal investigation.
Right.
And so that indicated that either the civil suits led to the opening of a criminal investigation, or there was already a criminal investigation for some reason, and the timing just happened to kind of correlate or whatever. So we know that there's more going on in the background now than just those civil suits. We don't really know what is going on. And all that I know is that there are rumblings in the media sphere of people working on sources in the background and people talking about exposure that hasn't come out yet. So it's still developing, but we have to wait.
Yeah, well, I mean, that story was so fascinating to me because it was the first time I had really given real credence to the idea that the music industry is very similar to our political industry, that you don't rise to the top unless you are once again playing in this blackmail world. Do you think it's that simple that in fact you cannot become a titan of industry if you are not either chosen by the blackmailers or a blackmailer yourself?
Today's episode of Liberty Lockdown is brought to you by sheathunderwear.com. They just sent me a bunch of pairs, and let me tell you, they are the most comfortable, high-quality boxer briefs I have ever owned or worn. So, for 2024, step up your underwear game. Graduate from holes, loose fabrics, cheap cotton briefs that bunch up, and buy the greatest underwear that has ever graced the balls of man. Sheath Underwear, the underwear of legends. Sheath can be worn as regular boxer briefs, or you can use the incredibly high-tech Sheath pouch to keep everything separated. I don't know if I'd recommend that for everybody, but if you're the right type of man, these are the right type of boxer briefs, baby. I wear these every day, and I can tell you, these are the most comfortable pair of briefs I have ever worn. I only wear them at the gym because the rest of the time I go commando, but that's just for me. You can live your life however you prefer. The website is fully stocked with different designs, winter-based layers to keep you warm, ladies apparel, and more. So, go to sheathunderwear.com, and if you use promo code LIBERTY, you're going to get 20% off. Once more, sheathunderwear.com and promo code LIBERTY for 20% off.
I'm leaning more and more in that direction, and it's not just because of the public stuff that I've posted about, because now that I've been publishing about it, I'm getting DMs from all kinds of people in the music industry, in the entertainment industry, in the sports industry, and a lot of those DMs I'm keeping private intentionally.
Sure.
And it's becoming more and more apparent that it's not just sexual blackmail that allows people to rise to the top, although Diddy's particular brand of, shall we say, rising to the top was mostly sexual blackmail, but it's also things like drug gangs laundering money. So I've been digging a lot into how especially like in the 80s and 90s, rising through hip hop, a lot of that hip hop was essentially just a money laundering operation for drug dealers that like in New York City, for example, drug dealers had a shitload of money they needed to launder into clean money, and doing things like promoting huge parties, throwing shows at clubs, promoting artists. Those are ways that you can sort of blank check a lot of dirty money into clean money by just claiming you made a lot more at something than you did or whatever. And that has been, part and parcel of the music industry for a long time. So it's basically like all of the black market industries are the things selecting for who gets to the top. And it's not really about who has the most talent as much as who has the connections and is willing to play the game.
Yep.
And I forget where the quote came from exactly, but something came up in the Diddy investigation that sort of hit the chord that Diddy actually kind of preferred artists that weren't talented, because if an artist is talented, they have a lot of power. Like if an artist can produce high quality work, like a Kanye, they can kind of go do their own thing. But if an artist is fucking shit, then you're the only thing holding them up. They are beholden to you in a big way before you even blackmail them. And then, you throw a little extra spice on top and they're fucked if they don't do what you say.
Yeah. Well, if we've learned anything about Kanye West over the past few years, you really can't control that dude. So, probably
maybe,
not a good guy.
Maybe you can these days. I mean, his new fucking identity is super weird. His new wife starting a fucking porn website. Like, it looks to me like it's either not Kanye anymore or they MK Ultra the shit out of his brain or something.
Or he just had a mental breakdown.
I mean, real.
He had been suffering with mental issues. It seemed to me, as a huge fan of his. I mean, I've been a fan of his for 20 years or however long when he first came around.
But I would caution everyone to think about like mental breakdown. Think about like Britney Spears. Think about Michael Jackson. Think about like mental breakdown is, the number one symptom of being MK Ultra. And I think back to that Harley Pasternak text about like, we're going to drug you up so hard that you'll never be able to see your kids again kind of things. You best believe there are drugs out there, cocktails that can, hit the schizophrenia button kind of a thing.
And that's how you can control these people. And honestly, even if they didn't drug you, just having that type of pressure and those type of threats would be enough to break some people. That like, oh, you're going to take my kids away from me? Like, I would snap if that happened to me. So, well, do you think Diddy ultimately was responsible for the killing of Tupac?
I think he was involved. I don't know as he was necessarily, like, it depends on what you think of as responsible. I think it's pretty clear that he put the hit out through his associates. But based upon the way that Diddy was essentially selected by his buddies that were running drugs and by his and then by Clive Davis, who was doing other things. And so Diddy was kind of brought up on much bigger power structures than his own desires. His desires were just what made him do what they wanted. And so you could say that Diddy was responsible for the hit on Pac, but I would argue that the power structures elevating Diddy probably had a lot more to do with that.
Interesting.
But it's hard to say. It's kind of lost in mystery. I am working behind the scenes with a couple of different sources and people to try to get to the bottom of it and expose a little more of that, but I'm not sure if I'm necessarily going to be able to, break any new eggs, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guy who allegedly was the gunman says that he was offered $1 million to do it, and that's pretty damning if you can prove it. But I guess the way Diddy got off the hook is that he basically reneged on the deal and he didn't pay the $1 million, and that's so like all of a sudden that's not a hit that you put out. Like, is that really the defense?
There's some pretty weird fucking defenses out there these days. Like and I mean, even back then, like the law has gotten weirder and weirder. History's gotten more and more complex and obscured as we moved away from that kind of time period. But even up to today, it's like, now what the fuck is the law anymore? We're looking at these like presidential, like back and forth legal battles. It's like the law is disintegrating quickly. Legal defenses are getting fucking stupid.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that actually leads me back into the original topic that we were talking about. If RFK Jr. is compromised, why are they withholding Secret Service protections? Do you have, I mean, doesn't that seem conflicting?
Huge questions here. I mean, if RFK is compromised, there's so many questions about why are they treating him the way they're treating him? Because it's not just that they're withholding Secret Service, which is a big question, but then they're also like the media is fucked up about him. Like the media is clearly terrified of him. There's so many indicators that he is a really bad deal for the power structures, like right down to the way he talks about the CIA. And even if he would get into office and then renege on all those claims and not actually go after the CIA, just him talking about them the way he talks about them in public is bad for them. And so I'm very confused by it. And I mean, it makes me wonder, like, are they so good at what they do that they are capable of making that effective of like a plant bad actor kind of a, controlled opposition guy? Because that's impressive. If they're the ones putting RFK in the place he's in intentionally as a bad, like for their own interest, that indicates a whole other level of sophistication that does not align with a lot of other sort of CIA Mossad operations in the past, which have left evidence all over the place and have been generally kind of clumsy.
Right. I mean, this is the other thing. I mean, the same question applies to Trump as far as I'm concerned. Like he does so much that is counter to the military-industrial complex in terms of rhetoric. He does so much that's counter to the media, domination of our information space. Calling them fake news and kind of destroying their brand. Like that's not good for the CIA. That's not good for Mockingbird Media. Like they don't want that. They don't want a guy who's talking about let's get out of these wars. Like what are we doing? And then he simultaneously is being credited with basically being the guy who greenlit the last $100 billion in foreign aid to 3 proxy wars. And I'm like, who the fuck are these people and what is happening? And I can't get a read on anything.
Yeah. I wonder about the Trump angle a lot because people, some of the really woke is the wrong word. Some of the sleuths do present the argument for Trump being really powerful, controlled opposition. And it's important to consider. I kind of lean towards, I see more evidence that he's just his own actor that doesn't give a fuck and has enough power that he can kind of do what he wants. But he acquired that power through a lot of friends with Israel, through a lot of very big corporate powerful friends, through a lot of big banking friends. And so his interests are the interests that we're seeing. And they're not as pure as the Trumper crowd would love to paint it as. That's kind of where I lean towards. And it's wild how many different theories there are. There's the full Q theory, which is that Trump is this 4D chess player that's faking his positions in order to take down everything.
Ian, he has already arrested the entire deep state. The prosecutions are already completed.
If true, oh my fucking God, I love it. That's the best thing ever. I'm so on board. Whoa, let's all go home. If that's true, that's so fucking cool. But I think that's a little too green grass and pastures for me. And I'm going to keep doing what I do until proven otherwise. Right. Currently, I lean towards he's just his own dude that is a complex, kind of corrupt piece of shit guy that also has some great ideas and is at the very least not literally the CIA's guy like our current one.
Yeah, it's just so challenging to get a read, and I think probably the underlying factor that makes analysis so challenging is that there are multiple nation states, there are multiple intelligence agencies, there are multiple probably not governmental but crime organizations that are involved in uplifting and destroying different politicians. So essentially we're trying to analyze from the outside. Well, within it's a whole bunch of different power structures that are vying for power. And I think that just makes it very challenging to get a read on things. Out of curiosity, what do you think the underlying justification is for the war in Ukraine? Because I don't know if you've done as much research on this as I have, but I've
definitely not as much as you. But
I've dug deep, and because I had to debate Destiny on it over a year ago, so I dug really deep to try and get to the origin story, the Maidan Revolution, and everything else. And it's this is clearly what the Western powers, including the American military-industrial complex, wanted. They wanted Russia to invade Ukraine, as far as I can tell, and if not, they certainly wanted to weaken Russia and ultimately topple Putin. Do you have a thesis as to why he's so dangerous to them? Because it doesn't seem as if he's very provocative in that he wants to actually move on Europe or anything like that. He just wanted Ukraine to not be in NATO, and they're like, well, we're going to put him in NATO anyways.
I agree. I think I agree with everything you're saying there, and the implications of such, in that Putin, when you step out of Western media and actually go look at what Putin says in his own words and look at Russian media and look at his actual actions, no, Putin is just trying to govern Russia and make Russia secure and Russia healthy and stable. And the way I see it is having, symbolically having what the USSR once was, now Russia, having that nation be sovereign, powerful, healthy, happy, Christian, having those elements in place is hugely compromising to sort of the Western globalist agenda of creating sort of a global techno semi-fascist state where we're all owning nothing and being happy. Because if you have this shining example of a better life in what is, ostensibly communist Russia, which is evil, which they're not communist anymore. No. If you have them around, just having clean subways, for example, to quote Tucker Carlson, that's not a good look if you're slowly degrading the quality of life in all of the Western nations. And so in one regard, I see it as a threat to the ideological control of Western nations in our own minds. But in another way, in order to wage the kind of campaign of control that is being waged upon Western citizens, you need a boogeyman. You need an enemy, right? And they've always had an enemy. You know, we had the USSR through the Cold War. We had the Nazis back in World War II. And once the Cold War ended, they needed a new one. So they, 9/11 just happened to happen, and we had these terrorists in the Middle East. But then the war on terror kind of fizzled out too, and we needed a new one. And the war in Russia and Ukraine came just in time to reignite this boogeyman vibe. And I just look at what the media is doing and how they're acting and what they're saying. And when you look at how the media treats Russia, that is like textbook boogeyman creation, like hide under the desk to survive nuclear war. It's that same kind of thing of like, Ukraine is the last bastion against, the fall of democracy. It's like,
right. Which is so ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay.
This extraordinarily corrupt nation that doesn't even have elections right now. And that's going to be the last stand for democracy.
That we sent the CIA into coup and kind of elevate a semi-Nazi party into power. It's all very strange.
If that's symbolic of democracy, I am no fan of democracy.
And that's not to mention all of the food industry, like the farming and the agriculture in Ukraine, the bioweapons labs that are in Ukraine, the resource, it's like Ukraine is a strangely important country that I think not a lot of people realized before the war there started. And I think that still the vast majority of Americans think it's important for the wrong reasons, quite intentionally so.
Yeah, well, and then you add into it the other layer of kicking Russia off of SWIFT, and then the BRICS alliance creating a new currency to compete with the global reserve status of the U.S. dollar. There's lots of reasons to not like Putin at this junction. But my point is, 15 years ago, there wasn't many reasons to dislike Putin. He very much wanted to be friendly with the West. He wanted to be added into NATO. And they just kicked this dude in the face over and over and over again. And it's like, this is the nation with the most nuclear weapons, with the most advanced nuclear arsenal on the planet. Why do we want so desperately to be enemies with this guy? And I think all of the reasons that you and I have both laid out kind of answer that question, but it's just so fucking dangerous, man. I'm like, I'm very confident that Putin does not want to escalate things and he does not want war with NATO. But I am also equally confident that he is not giving up Crimea at minimum, and probably not the eastern portion of Ukraine at this junction without an actual nuclear exchange. And they don't seem to be relenting. It's fucking nuts. Does it make you nervous at all? Because I try not to get into the fear-mongering state of things, but this is really dangerous. They're playing with fire as far as I can tell.
I try not to. I don't think about it too much, and that's intentional. It's just important to stay sane. But realistically, if I do go into my opinion of why I'm actually not really worried about it, it's the UFO thing. In that,
interesting.
The way I see it, UFO sightings are so prevalent and so historically documented by so many high-level military figures, not to mention all the other people documenting them, that they're real. And we have a lot of government documents now being released, whether for Project Bluebeam psyops or for legitimate disclosure, whatever, I don't care. We've got enough evidence that there's a version of the UFO thing that is real in the way I see it. And if that's true, like if there are recovered crafts and recovered technologies, then the next step in that logical process to me is if only one side, good or evil, so to speak, had it, then that side would be ruling the world with UFO technology. Like just like nuclear weapons were, when one side got the nukes, the moment the other, it was essential that another side got the nukes. Otherwise, America would have suddenly dominated the whole world. And that's why Russia got them. And now we have this stalemate. So the way I see it, we have implied, shall we say, UFO technology Cold War going on right now between multiple powers in the background. Because we allegedly know that some crashed in Germany, some crashed in Russia, some crashed. It's very likely that there is technology dispersed around the world in various secret little, rabbit holes. And we know that a lot of the sightings had to do with nuclear bases, nuclear arms, nuclear technologies, where they were showing up and the power would get cut off at whole nuclear facilities. Yep. And so the way I see it, whatever the UFO technology is, it trumps nuclear technology. And the UFO technology is probably the actual wild card. And it's probably way more dangerous than nuclear technology. I mean, it implies free energy. And free energy implies, if you follow that to the next step, it means you can create an infinite amount of energy in any place, which means you can create infinitely more power than a nuclear explosion if you wanted to make a weapon. And
you can turn the Earth into a sun. I mean,
bingo, exactly. Or just like death ray a whole part of the, like whatever it is.
Exactly.
And so the way I see it, we don't actually understand what the real arms race is going on behind the scenes. And the real arms race is at a standstill for one reason or another. And I just choose to think that it's because there are good guys holding it at bay, or at least holding, the evil. Like that's what I choose to believe, because I have enough evidence that there's something going on that we don't understand. And I kind of think that nukes are actually probably not what we think they are relative to power at this point in time.
That is a fascinating conclusion.
And it would explain why, we're not actually this afraid in the way we should be of like Russia bringing a nuclear submarine over to Cuba, of us putting like, of just the escalation of the nuclear aspect is like, yeah, it's scary, but they're not like,
they're not acting scared.
Yeah, there's no way a politician would feel immune to nuclear war, because there's no bunker that's going to protect you. There's no situation that will protect you unless there is, and we don't know about it.
Yeah, that is a fascinating analysis.
I actually I saw a post on Twitter yesterday that was like a really cool theory that I hadn't quite leapt to yet, of like maybe actually UFO technology disarmed the entire nuclear stockpile of all nations already, as in like literally rendered them inert. Yep. And, you would never announce that. If you're the U.S. and some UFO came down to your base and went, and then all of your nukes turned off, you would never tell anyone. And so they posited the theory that maybe actually all nukes on the planet are actually fake at this point, and there's something else going on. And it's like, I have no idea. But holy shit, it was a crazy idea to think about, because it's like,
no, that is interesting.
How would you know?
I think the only thing that gives me pause on that is that if it was in fact extraterrestrial life that had shut down our nuclear arsenal, you would think that all of the little skirmishes amongst the human beings would probably diminish, and we would be like, yo, we got to come together. We got this crazy threat. But they don't do that. They're still having escalatory fights with one another, which makes me wonder, and this is Tucker Carlson's thesis, and I don't know if you like or hate Tucker or think he's a CIA asset or whatever, but okay. And I do too. But I'm curious as to whether or not he's right, that these are in fact not aliens, not extraterrestrial, but in fact interdimensional. And do you have a conclusion? Because that's what he says he's been told by trustworthy sources. And I'm like, holy shit, if that's true, that's amazing.
Yeah. I should clarify that I love Tucker. I don't agree with him on everything, but I fucking love him. I love what he's doing, and I love the way he speaks, and the way he speaks truth, or the way he speaks his truth. And you point out, I follow everything he says about UFOs. He's very well versed, and he has a ton of very deep sources. And I think you understand too that the deeper you get into journalism, like in my own experience, just over the last year, the deeper I get, the more higher level sources I have in my inbox and in my network. And now when I need to know something, when I was like a regular citizen, I had no way to know except for Googling something. But now if I need to know something, like I know people in certain industries where I can message them and be like, hey, do you have an inside line on this? Because I need to know the truth. And so Tucker has that times 1,000. And when you look at what he says about quote aliens, it lines up perfectly with what everyone else is saying about them. And I look to what the CIA has spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on remote viewers, like remote viewing technology, like humans essentially meditating and sending their consciousness to like go view other places on the planet. There are documents where they talk about remote control of the reverse engineered technology, these crafts, of like trying to figure out how these like alien crafts are controlled by the brain. All of it points to some version of like fifth dimension ether technology. What Ashton Jones talks about is kind of compelling. Some version of like, it's not necessarily other planets. It might
Ashton
be
Forbes.
Ashton Forbes, yeah.
Okay.
On X. Yeah.
Yep.
It might not be other planets. It might be other dimensions. It might actually be that they are terrestrial and have been here for a shit long time, and they've been either in Antarctica or under the water or underground. Like there's all kinds of versions of potential reality that don't actually involve aliens, that I think are far more likely at this point. It's also possible that there are aliens and there are terrestrial non-human entities. I mean, who knows? Alien lore is a wild rabbit hole, full of disinformation, full of crazy theories. But I think that certain parts of it are definitely true at this point. And the fun part is trying to figure out which parts of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had Ashton on the show, and his deep dive in MH370, which I won't talk about in detail because I don't want to get the little disclaimer put at the bottom of the episode. But it's fascinating if just the more macro analysis of it is correct, that in fact they have the capacity to create wormholes, which would mean that you probably have the capacity to create limitless energy, which ties once again into this UFO extraterrestrial or otherwise phenomenon. And it's like, it just seems as if there's kind of a revolution in technology that may be happening under the or beneath our perception. Do you think that it's nation states that are in basically in a cold war with one another when it comes to this technology, or do you think that we don't have it and in fact it is some other entity entirely?
Good question. I kind of think neither of those two options, as in nation states, I think is the story that's told to the peasants about the world. And I think that nation states are completely obsolete in most ways. As in, yes, the US government is a powerful entity, but we all know about how corporations, PACs, interest groups have captured the US government on purpose, because the US government has certain monopolies on force, monopolies on taxation. The government has power that is vested to it by the people. And so it's a very useful tool. And at this point, I see all nation state governments as essentially tools to be used by the real power bases of the world, which are more like these sort of like conglomerates of corporate banking, globalist military powers. Let's not forget organized crime too. I think a lot of regular people forget that organized crime is like every bit as powerful as it has ever been in this world. And it has always been like banking, organized crime, media. Those are like various power bases that have always worked together. And the way I see it is we have sort of like a Western globalist conglomerate, kind of like the WEF, Western banking Israeli kind of circle, all hanging out. And we have at least kind of the BRICS, Russian, China might be like there's at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 kind of pulls to the global power bases right now, the way I see it. And then there's all of the decentralized like rebels, be they sort of like Arab terrorism groups, be they, people like us in the West that are kind of rebelling against our media, fascism, whatever the fuck is going on here. Then there's like all these other regular people that are kind of like pew-pewing from the stands, so to speak.
I think that's a really good analysis. I mean, the history that we were taught was that organized crime was very much in control in the early 1900s, and then they were wiped out. But I think the more likely answer is that they in fact took over, that they took control to a certain extent. And in reality, whether or not they did or didn't, it doesn't really matter, because I view the state to just be organized crime syndicate with a monopoly on violence and basically legal immunity. So it's like you're always up against the mob, you just whether or not you know it. Which is why, at the end of the day, I'm a libertarian, and so against the state. I've never got a clear read from you as to what your political leanings are. What do you have a feel?
They changed too much. I started out as very liberal before I knew anything. I swung super conservative once I learned a little. I swung back towards the middle once I learned more, and I think that all along the way, I've been gaining more and more libertarian in me. At every step of the way, because everything I learn about government, about corporations, about the way the world works. I mean, I started this just trying to understand how money works. And then that inherently, you need to learn about intelligence agencies. You need to learn about organized crime. You need to learn about government and politics, central banking, and all of that just inherently pushes someone to be more and more libertarian as you learn that every single power structure in our world is corruptible and corrupt. And the logical answer to all of it is more liberty for regular people, less government overreach, less accumulation of power. With in an ideal world, we would have, certain government organizations that help keep power in check, that help regulate corporations, that help. Like, I do still hold some liberal beliefs, and I do still hold plenty of conservative beliefs, but I think it's got to be balanced between essentially those 3 camps of regulating big power bases, individual sovereignty. Honestly, I think I have no basis in like classical political theory, and so I get kind of confused a lot of times between what you would even call me or what you would call other people. And I think for me, the line between conservative and libertarians feels very blurred at this point, because conservative used to be like the party of like big corporations and war, and like when I was growing up, it was like the George Bush era. And now that's
not a good era for conservatism.
Yeah, that's like the Democratic Party now.
Exactly.
And the conservatives that I know are all like either Trump supporters or libertarians, essentially. And a lot of the Trump supporters kind of feel like libertarians anyway. And so I'm very confused. Yeah. Like, what the fuck is going on with the conservative
I think
thing?
Your confusion is understandable, but at the same time, it's because everything is evolving very rapidly. I mean, as you said, when I was a kid, the conservatives had very, very limited similarities to someone like me. But now the broader conservative movement, or at least the America First movement, is very much in alignment with someone like me. So I think that they're actually coming closer to libertarianism. And that's one of the main reasons I've given positive coverage towards Donald Trump, is that whether or not he is a genuine believer or actually enacts any of the policies that he has popularized, he has helped in popularizing a lot of these concepts that are quite libertarian. Then he goes around and he spends more money than any president in 4 years, and I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? It's very frustrating, but I do think that from my vantage point, it's not really about the label. Like, who cares if you call me a libertarian or whatever? Like, the people that I get along with well are the people that are in pursuit of truth. Like, and a lot of times people say, oh, that's the red pill path or whatever. Yeah, maybe it is. But like, once you're on that path, once you start to understand that there, as you described it, there's so much corruption in corporations, in politics, every media, every major entity out there, you're like, yeah, I just want there to be less accumulation of power to these evil entities, and I want there to be more power to the people. And it's like, okay, so that's it. That's my belief. Whatever label that gives me.
I think the labels are really just used to divide us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. Because like Kim Iverson, I get along with great, but like at the end of the day, we'll probably end up voting differently. But she is clearly in pursuit of truth, and those are the people I like. I like RFK when he talks about, the CIA. It's like, holy shit, this is a level of acknowledgement that is really valuable, and
so refreshing. And honestly, too, people that are in pursuit of truth are also people that are inherently sort of like pro free speech, because there is no truth without free speech. And anyone who's inherently pro free speech is someone you can just talk to about anything. And there's someone who's not going to be offended by like every single thing you say. And they're not. It's this, like, it diffuses the volatility and the vitriol of kind of of liberalism right now, because liberalism is being used by the establishment to divide a lot of people right now. People that are like liberal in the true sense of the word are still wonderful, because they are willing to have open debate, have an open discussion. They just have a different like political ideology versus like the sort of like brainwashing that's happening in the media and like the Central Democratic Party's thing, whatever that is.
Yeah, well, I it's been heartbreaking to watch what's happened to the left. Because as a kid, the left was usually the free speech defenders, and they were also the anti-war movement. If there was ever any decent sized one, it was almost always from the left when I was a kid. And now it's couldn't be more the opposite. And actually, going back to a topic from way earlier, I think that the Russia narrative, the total essentially coup against Donald Trump in 2016, or actually 2015, you have the FBI spying on him, you have the Steele dossier, everything else. It demonstrates to me that there was in fact a plan to basically make the left bloodthirsty. Like, they wanted them to be prepared for this war against Russia, which was still many years away, which tells me that in fact there is a game plan. There is a higher level organizing body within the government, because oftentimes people will just say, oh, this is just bureaucrats run amok. It's just chaos. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. I don't know if that's true, because the Russia narrative was seeded so many years before they actually needed it. That tells me that there was a purpose for it. Do you think that's a good analysis, or am I reaching?
I think it's an awesome analysis. And I think that people often get fooled by only going so far down the path of truth without doing enough digging to get to why, like, oh, that's where it makes sense. Because they're right that, the vast majority of the landscape is just bureaucratic greed and people looking out for their own interests and trying to climb ladders. But that is the landscape upon which, a few very powerful people at places like the CIA, or places like, the think tanks, the globalist think tanks, like the Council for Foreign Relations, these highly powerful people are professional players of that field, where they can look ahead and they say, like, if our objective is war with Russia, what are the pieces on the board we need to move around and manipulate in order to get there? And when you're on a playing field full of rich and powerful, greedy motherfuckers, those are highly manipulable people, and they're pretty predictable too. And so if you need a war with Russia, the CIA has all sorts, and I'm just using the CIA as the simple proxy for like the more complex power structure we're talking about. but they have all sorts of angles with which they can, start a coup. They can get these corporations aligned with this other part of like, start that going on. Okay, now media friends, we need this to happen. And Hillary really wants to get elected. So we can just kind of feed her like, and I'm just kind of making shit up, but like, you can see how if you're in that position, and I'm not like, I mean, Hillary did really pay for the Steele dossier to get made.
Yeah.
And, she had lots of motivations to do so. And so whether or not it was her original idea or someone kind of fed that idea to her, you start to realize how like, when you, a regular person, when I want something done in this world, I think, okay, how can I achieve that outcome? Like if I want to, like, suppose I want to rent that house, but they don't want dogs there. It's like, well, I can do certain things to manipulate the situation to be like, maybe I pretend my dog is a small dog. Maybe I don't tell them about the dog. Maybe maybe I'm really clever and I have a whole bunch of people with dogs apply and make it feel like everyone in my town has dogs. And then suddenly they're like, okay, I guess we have to rent to someone with a dog. Yeah, and I make all my friends have really bad applications, but they have a dog, and they can. And so then they're like, okay, we'll just go with the best one that has it. Like there are ways to manipulate the world to get what you want, and the way you become a billionaire, or the head of the CIA, or the head of Mossad, or whatever it is by being really fucking good at manipulating the world to get you what you want. So,
well, I think that's exactly right, and this is brings to mind another very high-profile character that I can't get a good read on. And that happens to be the richest man in the world, a guy who and I are both very appreciative of for the platform because it has allowed us to speak freely. But at the same time, if you look at his history, he has made a fortune off of government contracts. He has made a fortune off of working with NASA and intelligence agencies and all sorts of shit that would probably make you think that he is a bad guy, like through and through. But then a lot of what the risks he appears to be taking to allow for us to speak freely seems to have put him in the target zone. But is that a high-level four-dimensional chess play that we're not analyzing properly? Anyways, what do you think about Elon Musk?
I think my opinion of Elon Musk is based upon actually following him far longer than the job I'm doing now. Is I got pretty interested in him, like, I don't know, back when he was first starting Tesla and then started SpaceX, and I was kind of like, what the fuck is going on? He was just fascinating.
Yeah.
And the thing that I kind of always come back to is that actually, like, when you look, I used to be a teacher, and so I tend to look beyond what people are saying and doing and into like the core of like, what's their motivation? Like, who are they and what do they want from the world? And like, what's their vibe?
Right.
And his vibe ever since the start has been sort of consistent. Like, he's been this like fucking eccentric billionaire that got there. Well, he wasn't always a billionaire, but he got to this rich and powerful status that he was kind of given. Always kind of on this platform of like, I want the best for humanity. I'm this like far thinking, like I want to seed other planets. I want to like change the whole narrative. I want to change everything. And I'm sure we all know that in order to get to where he is now, he's had to make all kinds of sketchy deals. He's been in all kinds of weird, like, powerful blackmailable situations. He's been in all kinds of rooms where, things got said. And so he's not clean by any means. Like, he's definitely done dirty shit. But at the same time, like, in order to, if he was a good guy, he would have to do all that in order to get to where he's gotten. So like, if he was Anakin, if he was Luke Skywalker trying to infiltrate the Sith, he would have to get his hands dirty and do some Sith shit to get in with them.
Right.
And it would be really hard to tell what was real. If he was actually like a Sith plant and he was trying to play the field, like, it would probably look kind of similar as well. But I lean towards Elon seems like the same way I see Trump. Elon seems to me to be like his own dude doing his own thing, playing the game the way he has to play it in order to get what he wants. And it seems like what he wants is just the best for humanity. Like, for everyone to have lots of kids, which he's very good at, showing everyone how to do, and to,
as aggressively as possible.
Oh yeah, like his actions kind of align with his words on all of his topics. And buying Twitter and changing it to X and giving us this platform for almost completely free speech. And then, like, for example, recently the Authentics thing, the verification ID Israeli intelligence company thing, came out, and people made a big noise about it. Shout out to Censored Men for kind of championing that charge, and a lot of us kind of got on board. And eventually Elon noticed it and looked into it, and then he changed it. And I don't know what the backdoor deals were there and why, like, what happened, but like, I don't know. He's giving us a lot of freedom in a critical year where if this year we did not have X, the entire political experience would be fucked up. Like, everything would be
I don't think people extrapolate this properly. If not for X, you would not have the increasing leniency across most other social media and most other video platforms. Like are they perfect? Fuck no, they're awful. But they have actually loosened or become less stringent when it comes to what they forbid us to talk about. And I think that's all a part of basically having this one major entity that allows for genuine free speech or very close to it, which creates a competitive cycle that they're like, look, if we don't loosen up, we're going to lose everything to this company.
Exactly.
And
it changes the way that the news has to report too, because now everything is already out on X before the news can even report on it. And so it just changes the whole nature of our year right now. And I find it really hard to believe that if he was in any way a controlled bad actor, that would ever fly. Like that's not a strategy you would employ.
How does that benefit them? And it certainly doesn't benefit them having one of the most popular, most wealthy people on the planet talking about the depopulation crisis and encouraging people to have kids. Like that's not in alignment with what the UN or the WEF talks about at all. So there's enough signals in that regard that gives me real hope. And it's just, I'm always brought back with hesitancy from like the Whitney Webbs of the world and other people that think, oh, he's just trying to create this everything app to basically trap us like the technocracy in China. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. I don't fucking know. But at the end of the day, like what he's giving us in the interim is so valuable when it's so crucial that we have it. I mean, we would be absolutely doomed in this election cycle. I think they could probably have just put Biden back in there if not for X and the open conversations that we're allowed to have.
Oh yeah. I mean, my parents are a good example of like, this generation that's older than us, but a lot of people, you don't have to be old. A lot of people are getting their media from either mainstream or like alternative that are actually mainstream sources, like the Daily Wire, for example. And, those sources are all giving you a very controlled look at what's happening in the world. And like my parents didn't even realize that Joe Biden was senile until they announced that he was senile themselves because they want to switch him. And so it's like, and they would argue with me about like, no, he's completely fine. Like you clearly are. What are you watching online? It's like,
Isn't that
the real world?
Isn't that like a punishing experience to have people in your life that are totally oblivious and you're like telling them and they tell you you're crazy. And then as soon as the news reports it to them, they go, hey, what I told you were crazy about 2 years ago. Now I agree. I mean, I'm sure, especially with what you do, you must get that all the time, but it is very frustrating for someone like me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't let it bother me too much. I also don't have that many friends like in
normie land.
Yeah, like my normie friends all left during COVID, and I live in the most normie town you could ever imagine. It's like as brainwashed liberal as a town can get, and there are tons of lovely people here. And even the brainwashed like normie people are lovely people. They just are very fooled about the world. Well, most of them are lovely people.
But, are you in California?
No, I'm in Washington State. I'm like I'm in a miniature version of Seattle that's like more concentrated and more Seattle.
Got you.
But the way I see it is like I and maybe this is the teacher in me, is like I can't hold their environment's trickery of them like against them.
Right.
And I don't I'm not looking for a gotcha on anyone. And when I do encounter those conversations of people that have these like clearly misled beliefs, I tend not to take the tact of like trying to tell them what's real, but rather asking them questions to try to find out how much they know. Because when you're if like someone says like Joe Biden is totally fine, be like, that's interesting. I don't like, have you seen the thing where his, have you seen the testimony from the court proceedings where they gave the reasoning for why he wouldn't get, why they wouldn't charge him with the documents? And if they're like, yeah, I read that, then it's like, okay, so how did you interpret it where they said he couldn't remember what year his son died? But if they didn't read it, then it's like, oh, interesting. You might want to check that out.
Right.
Because he didn't remember what year his son died.
Yeah, if they read it and they still think that he's right in the head, then they're probably just bad actors. But most people aren't that way. Most people
usually
argue
they just don't have the
ignorance.
information. And if you ask them, like, what are you basing your opinion on? You'll find out very quickly what they have are like. And I try not to then be like, oh, you got it. Like, usually they will realize what the actual boundaries of their understanding is, because most people are trained to have these knee-jerk responses. Like I watched a video on YouTube and now I understand it, even though they know they don't really. But like, so then they'll talk about it as though they understand it. But the moment you ask them questions and their brain is like, oh, there's literally nothing in that box.
Right.
They realize it. And even if you don't tell them anything about it, you just be like, oh, cool, bye. They're going to think about it all day long and be like, fuck, what don't I know about Joe Biden and some fucking boxes of right. And that's the best way to get people to get the truth.
I think what I was emphasizing with my frustration is that even though the media has lied to them for their entire lives, and very aggressively so in the past 5 years or 8 years really, they will not believe something until the broader news cycle picks it up. And I think that to me is the greatest frustration is like shit I knew definitively years in advance, over and like basically now, because I've been doing the show for 4 years, my life is just having the news report shit that I told my audience about a year or 2 or 3 years ago every single day. Like that's what my life is now. And it's like, I don't know. It feels painful at times because I'm like, why the fuck are you guys listening to these people? I'm telling you everything in advance. What is wrong with you? Why would you still go back to them? And why do you take it seriously today that they've said it? Now because they agree with me, I have to go back and reassess because now maybe I think I'm wrong. Like that's actually how I go about the news.
And by now it doesn't matter anymore. It's like, oh no,
exactly.
The lockdowns weren't the best move. Oh no, ivermectin actually did cure COVID if you took it early. It's like, oh well. Millions of people died that didn't need to. Millions of small businesses closed down. Nothing we could have done.
I know.
Actually, bitch, there was a lot of things you could have done.
Exactly.
Back then.
Like you could have listened to anybody who wasn't just totally indoctrinated and acted upon it. But it's just, I mean, what we're talking about is really grave injustice. Trillions, the largest wealth transfer probably in human history.
Oh, for sure.
$4, $5, $6 trillion from the poor and middle class to the not even to the wealthy, but to the uber wealthy. Like those are the only people that really came out super ahead during the lockdown era. And as you can guess, with my show being named Liberty Lockdown, I was very activated about this issue. And as a finance guy, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I'm just like screaming into the wilderness, like this is going to destroy the fabric of civilization. Like because once you have this level of income inequality, I'm a free market capitalist. I believe that income inequality is a natural phenomenon that you actually should not be waging war against if it is earned through righteous merit and activity.
You have a free market, which we don't.
Which we don't. So, but now, because we don't have a free market and because the income inequality is so vast and so many young people will never be able to acquire a home, more and more of them are going to turn towards the government and tell them, steal from the rich, give me free housing. And then, all right, now we're on the path to communism. And it's like, fuck, this is really dangerous. And because no one understands what happened in 2020, I don't think that they're going to understand that once again, they're being led astray. And this is my great fear, is that like, because people don't, at the end of the day, very few people have any understanding of economics. The prescription is always going to be wrong. And I think that's what concerns me. I don't really have a question for you. That was more of a
I'm right
rant.
there with you. In a lot of ways, it's like the prescription is just like what Big Pharma does. Is it's not a cure. It's a remedy for symptoms that they created that they'll sell us for the rest of our lives. And I would counter with like my optimism, which is probably just naive because I'm newer at this than you. It's probably just this nice naive optimism that'll slowly, callous and then fall off in the future. But like I like to think that we feel like we're really like deep in the technological advancement of the media space. Like we feel like we've had this sort of digital revolution and these things have been around for like, decades and decades and decades, but it's actually not. Like we're actually really new in the social media age. And
we're almost newborns.
Exactly. And the more I've thought about it, before X became X, there was never once in our history a time when we had a free and open, uncensored, not government controlled social media sharing space, right? Like Twitter was controlled from the start. Facebook was obviously controlled from the start. It wasn't even designed for media. Like there was like 4chan, but now actually it is the very first time that we have a public and like widely used decentralized information space to challenge the narratives. And so I always remind myself actually that things are changing really fast and we're at the start of the story, not the middle or the end. And their power is inherently crumbling around it because they don't have an answer to millions of citizen journalists, millions of people that can just access information on their own. And we're watching in real time how like Don Lemon's show is completely irrelevant now because no one actually watches it or gives a shit. And the moment it enters the free market, it falls. And we are starting to see that like, oh, we now have a media free market, almost completely free, like close. Right. And that is inherently like, I think that we're at the start of like a 20-year collapse of the old way of sharing information. And I'm optimistic that actually, because they're making the world so fucked, like because the lockdowns were so horrible and evil, millions and millions and millions of people woke up to like basic libertarian values and basic questions about authority. And I think that that will only accelerate as shit gets worse. I think it's going to get worse, but those hard times will make strong people. And I think those strong people will use these new tools to build a way better tomorrow, 10, 20 years down the line.
And if we have a capacity to speak to one another openly and honestly during that cycle of tumult, I think it will lead or at least increase the chances that there's a positive outcome on the backside of it. And I agree with you. I mean, I do think that we are essentially newborns in this space. It is such a massive evolution of the economy, the information space, everything. I mean, sociology, like everything is evolving so rapidly. It's very challenging. I mean, particularly for someone who's not super young. Like I didn't really grow up with the internet. I got it when I was in high school. So it's like this to me is still kind of a new thing. But I think for people that are being born in the past 20 years, they've always had it. So they think that like, oh, this is just the way life is. And it's like, no, we're still very much adapting to this, and humans don't adapt very quickly. So it's going to be interesting. As long as we don't, as long as nukes have actually been disarmed, I think we'll be okay.
There's going to be a lot of growing pains. There will be cultural growing pains, social growing pains. A lot will change. But I think that as long as we have like the freedom to speak, the freedom to share and connect, like as long as we don't hit like true authoritarian rule on the internet, which I don't even know if it's possible, then I think that we will inherently slowly solve the problems and move towards a better tomorrow.
Yeah,
as long as we don't kill ourselves on the way there.
That's a good way. It's a positive way to end it, which I usually don't end my shows positively. But I did want to ask you briefly about your social media experience. You said you haven't even been doing it for 4 years. Is that true?
Oh no, dude! I'm 1 year old at this point.
Fuck
I started,
you, dude. You started a year ago.
Exploded. Yeah, I started in May of 2023 with a video on TikTok about who owns the media. It's like, oh, BlackRock is the top shareholder, and TikTok fucking loved BlackRock content at the start. And I entered TikTok at a time when they were pushing long form videos on purpose because they just started that feature. And my videos are inherently this kind of like mystery dig format where it's good at keeping people engaged for that long, like 3 to 5 to 7 minute videos. And so my shit it was like 300,000 followers a month. It just blew up insanely big. And until I started to get really heavily censored because I started to be like, oh, it's actually not BlackRock. It's like the CIA. And then it's Jeffrey Epstein. And then it's Israel. And then it's like, okay, now fucking shut that dude down so hard. So then I branched out.
This guy's getting real close to the truth. We got to get him out of here. Yeah. That's funny.
And I use that censorship as a guiding light. It's like if I'm getting censored on a topic on a platform that is controlled by CIA and government forces, it's like, cool. That's where we're going to go next. So.
Yeah, you're like over the target, buddy. We're catching flack. Are you like, how many followers do you have on TikTok now? And are they still censoring you into oblivion?
Yeah, I've got 1.5 million followers on TikTok now, and I'm not very active there these days because so much of what I dig into, like I have multiple strikes. I'm like one strike away from getting banned. And so most of what I do is just too risky to even put there. So I've got a bunch on Instagram. I got a bunch here on X now. I've got starting the YouTube thing and the Rumble thing. So it's like branched out, which keeps me safe. And I do still get censored there. I'm actually trying to deal with, I made a video about who owns the UFC, and
I saw that.
Yeah, and that video I
posted. Ari Emanuel, right?
Yep, Ari Emanuel, and his dad was, a literal terrorist that was helping to found Israel. It was a whole, and so that video I tried to post it 3 times yesterday, and all 3 times it just like uploaded and then it has 0 views. It's like it's in this weird limbo phase where like the AI does not want it on the TikTok Spaces. So yeah, it's always a struggle over there, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, it was great. It was a great deep dive, and I would highly encourage people go check out your X account. That's where I found you, and because I'm too old for TikTok. That's where I post
everything. That's definitely the spot to keep up with me at this point, because TikTok is just for the TikTok crowd. I post all the same stuff to X.
legitimately, I think the work you've been doing is unbelievable.
Thanks,
all the success, despite the fact that you've blown up way faster than me, and God bless, you are doing it in a way that I can't.
We
and
all
I really
do it together, man.
no, exactly.
And then the rising tide lifts all boats. As long as we're here for truth,
Oh, dude,
we're all
I
going to get.
don't give a fuck, man. I love it, especially people that are putting out good stuff, and I think you are. So, please tell my audience where they can follow your work on X and anywhere else.
Yeah, on X, I'm Cancel Cloco, and I'm actually in the phase of like more seriously launching into long form content as a new kind of like avenue for more digging, and that is Cancel This Conspiracy on Rumble and YouTube. I've got cancelthisclothingcompany.com, which has links to everything as well as free resources. So if you go to cancelthisclothingcompany.com, you can find all my stuff.
I love it. Look, audience listening to me now, fucking subscribe, follow this guy. I'm sure most of you already do, but if you don't, you need to. Cutting edge, really, really great research. It has educated me on a bunch of areas of weakness and made me a more well-rounded debater in this arena. So I appreciate his work. Ian Carroll, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on, brother.
Thanks a lot, Clint. I appreciate it, man.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?